All right, welcome to Beyond the Noise, Signals, Stories, and Spicy Takes, the show where we dig into the stories of the people shaping the future of app-based computing with a special focus on mobile. I'm your host, Matt Klein, co-founder and CTO of BitDrift, as well as the founder of Envoy. Each episode, we'll talk with engineers, founders, and technical leaders who've transformed the way their companies build and understand what's happening inside their systems. We'll dig into the challenges, the breakthroughs, the lessons learned, and wrap it all up with their hottest takes. Let's dive in. Today, I'm thrilled to have Gabriel Savit, who's a former iOS engineer and now is co-founder and CEO at Runway, a mobile release management platform that helps teams automate, coordinate, and monitor their app releases. With extensive experience shipping apps at scale, Gabriel developed a love for designing and building awesome mobile experiences and a dislike for the friction and overhead required to actually get app updates out the door. Outside of mobile, Gabriel is known to travel to countries people haven't heard of, and he spends as much time as possible underwater. He holds 3 passports and a very expired pilot's license. Thank you, Gabriel, for joining us. That's an awesome intro.
Thanks so much for having me. Good to be here.
It's funny. Obviously, we're here for a technical talk, but I am also a scuba diver, although it is long expired. So I used to do it a lot when I was a younger person, but haven't done it in a while. But it's good to hear that you still get out there.
Yeah, I had a long break too. I started as a kid and didn't do it for a while, and my partner actually got me back into it and super avid now. So it's never too late. You should get
Where
back
do you
out
go
there.
now? I mean, I'm sure people are here listening for technical talks, but we might just, talk about scuba diving the whole time.
Sure, I'm up for that. So we actually live in a small town in Baja California in Mexico.
Oh, fantastic.
And
Okay.
right by here, there's a fairly well-known marine park that is just one of the best places we've ever dived. It's part of the reason we decided to move here and live here. So spend most of our sort of time diving there.
Fantastic. I
Yeah.
promise this is my last question about scuba diving, but one thing that I'm curious about is, at least my experience was also having started when I was a lot younger, is that there's been a lot of coral reef die off, right?
Mhm.
And I'm just curious, do you think that the scuba diving has gotten measurably worse in the time that you've been diving, or I don't know, just tell us briefly about that.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, unfortunately, I think it's pretty widespread. There are areas that are like doing better than others in that regard, but the Great Barrier Reef. When I was a kid, I grew up in Australia and dove up there, and this was, already things were deteriorating. But frame of reference then versus now, it's
Yeah.
changed dramatically. So yes,
Yeah, it's
this stuff
sad.
that's happening is
All
real.
right. Maybe we'll have to do another whole episode just on scuba diving, but let's
Sure.
let's get back into the tech talk. So yeah, so you have a career that's really entirely on mobile. Would love to start by just learning about how you got into mobile. I mean, what excited you about it, and tell us how you ultimately end up starting a company around it.
Yeah. Pretty random and kind of meandering path. But let's see, I guess starting at university, I was always interested in sort of engineering and technical stuff and building things and that kind of thing. Going all the way back, I actually sort of worked on, did some robotics, Lego robotics. I forget what it's called, First or something, that league where you program little robots with this sort of visual language, and was doing that sort of at an earlier age. But when it came to sort of university and actually sort of higher education, sort of picking a path, as it were, didn't know what I wanted to do. As you mentioned briefly, like I love planes and flying, pilot's license. So engineering plus aerospace, I thought I'd sort of try that as a track. As part of that, of course, part of that major, you do some comp sci, but pretty basic, pretty limited stuff. So had some exposure there, but obviously wasn't sort of anything like, let alone mobile apps, like any kind of like production software engineering, let's say. So really started when I took time off of university to co-found my first startup, which was a sort of hyper local marketplace thing in New York. Took a bit of time off school to build that with my brother and some friends. We weren't technical in the sense that we could build a product, right? So we either needed to outsource that stuff or figure it out ourselves.
Sorry, when you
Um,
say like hyper local marketplace, could you say more? What was that about?
yeah. This was kind of in the early days. Maybe I'm dating myself here, but early days of Groupon, and so the kind of crowdsourcing demand model, we wanted to kind of flip it and actually start on the demand side. So Groupon was trying to like sort of engender
Yep.
demand by putting out these crazy offers and kind of get foot traffic into businesses that way. We wanted to start on the demand side, so like in someone's neighborhood, they could hop on this app and sort of put in a request, basically like, we're a party of 4, we want to sort of go out for a meal, what have you got? And so businesses could respond in real time, almost like in a chat like way, or
Yep.
with automated rules that would sort of take in all that info. Some cool stuff like, you could tie into the weather. We had APIs pulling the weather. So if you're an ice cream shop, you might sort of increase incentives on a cold day when there's less,
Yeah,
less
makes
folks in
sense. Right.
your business. So yeah, it was that sort of like two-sided marketplace, but starting on the demand side, and tried to scale that out. It didn't go anywhere ultimately, but it was the reason why I sort of first got into mobile development. I worked on the iOS side. My brother did Android, and that sort of divide has stuck actually to this day. Really picked it up on the fly, and there was a whole lot of learning to do. Of course, we had some contractors helping, but ultimately, I think a lot of folks know how this works. It's tough, especially with a startup, to like get stuff done right and quickly. So kind of took over that code base and just learned by getting in there
Yeah.
and playing around. Yeah.
Were you entirely self-funded? I mean, like, how
That
did
was like
you
friends
how
and
did you do it?
family,
Yeah.
sort of small scrappy deal. We were kids. It's a very different journey than now with Runway, of course. But very, very scrappy, had a lot of
Yeah.
fun, and
I
yeah.
I also started a company when I was around 24 or 25, and it was a total
Okay.
failure.
Yeah.
But it is interesting because I feel like you learn actually a lot from that experience. And I guess my first question for you would be what were your big learnings from that time that I'm sure you take forward to Runway now? I mean, I'm sure there's
Yeah.
stuff that you learned then that you said, I'm not going to do that again, or I will do that again.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, first of all, like tying back to the previous point, like concretely, like that's what sort of taught me or, brought me in the direction of software engineering as a sort of production practice and mobile, of course. So like concrete learnings, more on the like startup business side, a ton of things, in my role at Runway now, I'm rarely touching code. I try to, but I sort of sneak it in, but doing a lot more on the business side. Everything I'm doing now and everything sort of I started knowing on the business side, sales side, I definitely learned aspects way back then.
Yep,
I
sure.
didn't know it at the time. It was a very different kind of sale. We were going door to door to businesses in New York, which definitely throws you into the deep end, and you learn some stuff there. But a lot of the discipline, a lot of the sort of approach and ways of working with folks and understanding how you bring any kind of product to market, a ton of learnings there. A lot of learnings around people and building teams. I think
I
we
was
were a
gonna,
very,
yeah.
very
I was
small
gonna
team at the
say
time.
that I feel like my biggest learning from that time was your co-founders matter, your people matter. It all matters a lot.
Yep.
Sorry, keep going. Yeah.
Yeah, no, a huge amount. And that learning, not even coming from a place of like things went horribly wrong with co-founders or the team, but you start understanding kind of like how you can really set up for success with the right people and the kind of effect that has, both good and bad. So yeah, just a ton coming out of that. But again, we were kids at the time. This is
Yeah,
sort of in
for
the middle,
sure.
middle of college. So a lot of just learning in general, and super fun, of course. But eventually wound that down, went back, finished my degree, still aerospace. And then sort of the next formative step, I guess, in the journey was working on my senior thesis project with a group. We decided to build a sort of small scale air traffic control system with an unmanned plane, a drone. And back then,
Oh,
I mean,
wow.
drones weren't even like a
Yeah.
thing in the
Wow.
way they are now. So it was really just, one of these hobbyist like RC planes. And we fitted it with a sort of onboard flight system. So rather than you control it from the ground, gave it a sort of central nervous system and then tried to mimic the interactions that normal planes have with air traffic control. So you could sort of give it directions for places to go in the sky and altitude and stuff like that, and it would kind of figure out how to get there versus direct
Well,
control.
and sorry, just so I understand, because it's interesting, you would program it before it took off, or there was like a remote component to it where you could give it, like an air traffic controller would, you would give it instructions while it was flying around.
Exactly, the latter. So yeah, it
Okay.
was still a remote component, but it wasn't direct control. So you would feed it instructions in sort of a standardized way.
Right.
um, it would interpret it, and it would take the plane where it needed to go. um,
Huh.
this isn't like groundbreaking stuff, but at the time we thought it was cool, and there were some interesting aspects that kind of our advisor encouraged us to explore. But concretely, we used an iPhone as the flight computer. So that's what we kind of just chucked on the plane. That was the central nervous system. And of
How did
course, someone
you?
had to,
Yeah, I mean, I'm just really interested now. How did you hook the iPhone up to the aircraft controls?
yeah, there was a, I mean, I barely remember the details here, but there was like a Raspberry Pi type thing that plugged into the iPhone. There was a whole
Okay.
lot of like
Yeah, right. Okay. Yeah.
rigging that needed to happen there
Yeah.
to get all the pins and the ports right.
Right.
But yeah, it was basically talking to I guess what are they called, like Arduino or something,
Arduino,
something
yeah, it's like pretty similar. Yeah.
something sitting in the
But
middle
like
there.
you had the phone talk to it over like a USB port or something, and then that would give it the instructions, and then it would do all of the flight control programming and stuff like that.
Exactly.
That's
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah.
All right.
So yeah, it was a cool contraption. Admittedly, didn't fly so well. But we did get a paper or two published about it, which is kind of crazy. And that was my like, yeah, next formative step in terms of mobile development. So I was the one that was building out the app that was running on board to power the flight control system.
Yep.
Super hacky, and looking back, it was really funny. I had very little idea of what I was doing. I think I had it running on just like piggybacked off some sort of boilerplate code from I forget what it's called, some like CG framework, like gaming stuff that would
Yeah,
just like
sure.
kind of run
Right.
it, and it was kind of doing the stuff as part of that loop. So super hacky, but that was the next mobile related project. At the time, I was actually still working on a side project app with my brother called Tab. It still exists. It is our internal guinea pig at Runway. We use it to test a lot of stuff in production or pseudo production.
It's actually funny that you say that, because I feel like at Bitdrift, our main problem is that we don't have an app, so we can't really dog food the system, and it's something
Yep.
that we've talked about a lot. Like, I realize that we're skipping ahead to the companies, but we have talked about doing an app.
Yep.
Just so that we have something that we can fully test the system on.
Yep.
But it's obviously very nice that you already had an app.
If you guys want to borrow Tab, it is a peak guinea pig at this point, so you can get in there.
We should talk.
Access.
Yeah, we should talk offline. Actually, that would be fun. Actually,
For sure.
Yeah. All right. Anyway, so sorry. So you made that app, and that app does what exactly?
Yeah, this was sort of in that weird transition period where we're figuring out like the previous company, are we ending it? What's happening? We were sort of like, it was losing steam, and I don't want to go too deep down storytelling here, but we were in New York at the time working in a company, and a lot of our friends were in the city. This was over a summer period, doing internships and stuff. So a lot of group dinners, a lot of like going out and struggling to split the bill. At the end of these
yes.
group dinners.
Okay. Right.
So very much, especially in that demographic, we found later, this is a more global thing. It's very cultural too, depends. But in that demographic, poor college students, you want to split the bill fairly. Some folks drink, some folks don't. Some folks order a ton of food, some don't.
Yeah.
So we sort of started toying around this idea of like OCR, reading a receipt, itemize it, let folks sort of assign items and do a fairer bill splitting.
Right.
And so, yeah, in this transition period, stuff was winding down. The previous company, we spent like a day just like hacking on this, and it kind of worked pretty well. And so we decided to launch it, and it actually took off like pretty organically. We still have, even though it's super neglected, still have a pretty healthy user base on it. Folks kind of across the US, a little bit international, using it. And so yeah, it's basically like bill splitting on steroids. There's a lot you can do, sort of multiplayer and OCR based stuff.
Yeah. And you said that it's neglected. Do you still work on it at all? I mean, or is it's just kind of done?
No. Like zero. Yeah, it's really maintenance mode. And again, guinea pig for Runway. It's a shame. I'd love if someone kind of took it over because some folks really love it.
But like when you test Runway and do releases, you just like make a comment change and then like deploy it. Like, how does that work?
Yeah, no, exactly that. It's very, very small, very small changes. Which is, this is getting like further down the line. Something that some teams do actually too, like the whole world of like ASO, right? And App Store optimization, like depending on your team and what your typical diff looks like and whatever, there's some teams that will ship like zero change versions just to get new versions out.
Interesting. Okay.
Which is a bit of a tangent, but that's like a thing. But yeah, nothing is happening in the Tab code base. A lot of README changes for sure. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So you did Tab, and then take us forward further.
Yeah. So Tab kind of happening on the side, senior thesis project, the UAV iPhone flight system. at that point, I guess I had like, some baseline of experience with mobile and specifically iOS dev. And so really just happened into a full-time role after school. I liked it. I realized I probably didn't want to work full-time in aerospace engineering. It's a very different kind of engineering. The work environment, the kind of work you do is so different. I had a friend who worked at Boeing. He was telling me about what he was doing. He graduated maybe a year before. She was working on a tiny, tiny piece of the flap track fairing, it's called, for the 787, which is like a little piece of the wing in one spot, just like a joint.
Yeah.
And he was spending all his time just like on some design stuff for that piece. And so you really lose the sense of the bigger picture, the sense of like iterating and actually sort of like shipping stuff, which is for me, very gratifying, and part of the reason
Yeah.
why the mobile stuff was very rewarding.
Well, I was going to say that, and if you mess up when you're working on an airplane, the implications are a lot larger typically than the kind of stuff that you and I work on.
Absolutely. Yeah. Getting into the sort of quality and monitoring side of things,
Yeah.
for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Different stakes. Really, yeah. Just like slow product cycles. It's a very different kind of work.
Sure.
So kind of realized early, didn't want to work in that necessarily. Liked the mobile stuff. And another friend who graduated again before me, I took time off, had started at Rent the Runway, which is a company maybe a lot of folks have heard of.
Yeah.
I think he was one of their first mobile hires. So they were I think it wasn't launched yet. He was just spinning up their iOS app, which obviously became, or still is, I guess, a huge part of their business. So he reached out, let me know they were hiring to grow that team. And I thought it sounded cool, just interviewed and started there. So that was my first, proper job and first foray into, real production iOS engineering. And I quickly realized how little I knew. Because like when you come in sort of like hacking on stuff and picking it up as you go,
absolutely.
you're missing a lot of context and understanding. So learned a ton. The whole team was learning a ton. So it was actually an interesting environment, right? It's not like coming into like a Google or some FANG job. There was a bit of push and pull, right? Because the team was young, the product was young. I was also learning. So it was a fun environment. We had a lot of freedom and agency to do a lot, especially on the product side. And this is what really drew me there as well. And this is part of the sort of story leading into Runway. Very much like a product engineer. I wasn't super excited about like tooling, build systems, lower level stuff. Like I really just liked sort of building UIs, building product and sort of experiences and getting them shipped and seeing how users sort of respond and iterating from there. So it was a great role for that. At the same time as the team was growing quite rapidly at the time, the needs on the platform side were increasing, and the needs around like tooling and process and CI, of course, started out without even having CI, which nowadays seems crazy. That was all creeping in. And that's where I think sort of like my transition or my broadening of like understanding, I guess, of this whole process and like how mobile works really end to end was growing, as well as my understanding of like the frustration and the fact that I actually didn't like a lot of that stuff.
Yeah. I've talked about this with a couple of different guests, and one thing that I think is interesting in this space, which is probably directly related to your company, so it's a good segue, is I feel like Apple and Google, they do an amazing job of getting the most apps as possible into the App Store, right? I mean, it's like to me, that's what they want. I mean, that part makes sense. But when it comes to, what growing teams need, right, in terms of whether it be build tooling or IDE support or release management or observability or whatever, it's pretty lacking, honestly. And I, prior to telling us about Runway, I'd love to understand from you, why do you think that Apple and Google don't help more with some of these things?
It's a great question. I think it's one that we ask ourselves a lot. It's a little bit of well, there's a lot of facets, I think, and this has changed over time. I don't know. One of the things that comes to mind is like you look at Apple nowadays and their business is in, I mean, it's always kind of been hardware is a big piece of it, right? Like that's a big focus. Also media, like they're a media company now.
Yep.
Like there's so much else going on. This feels like something that's just so far down the pecking order. Things work okay. And this gets to a broader point that we talk about a lot of just like the status quo. People accept it. It's how it is.
Yes.
Feels like a bit of that. They have so much else going on. This is just not high on the priority list. The same on the Google side. Like it's Apple's come a long way APIs wise, like their support for sort of like tooling around App Store Connect is in a much better place. So while that's not Apple themselves investing too much there, like at least they're kind of unlocking that opportunity to make people's lives easier when it comes to that stuff.
Yeah,
Google
sure.
is lagging even further there. Like the APIs are just a miss. They're not sort of shipping new stuff there. Google, you could say the same. They have a whole lot else going on. I think this
Yeah,
is
of
just
course.
down the pecking order. Like things work, and they at their level probably are not seeing a huge, downside to not
Yeah,
focusing
it,
more there.
it's it's mostly I just find it interesting, I guess, from a business perspective that um, pretty much every larger app, has to solve a lot of fundamental problems, right?
Hmm.
Like whether it be again around CI, dev tooling, ID, like all the things that we talked about.
Yeah,
And it just seems like a lot of these things get solved over and over and over again. It also
yeah,
provides a lot of opportunity for our types of companies to come in and do interesting things. So that's fine.
yeah,
I just think it's interesting, right? That there are these
yeah,
holes in the ecosystem that basically have to be filled either by companies or by large companies with large apps.
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, for sure. I think the other thing, not to like preempt this part of the conversation too early, but of course, like just AI and the confusion that's like
Yes. Yeah.
coming with all this froth now. I think
Right.
it's like even more than ever, like taking people's attention elsewhere. This
Yeah.
stuff is not going to go away. It's
No,
obviously
makes sense.
changing,
Yeah.
but it's not
Uh,
going away. And yet there's just so much
yeah.
distraction. And
All right. Yeah,
yeah,
we can definitely talk about AI in a bit. But I do want to get into how you founded Runway. So could you tell
yeah,
us just a little bit about what led you to that? What were the challenges that you were seeing?
yeah.
That would be fantastic.
For sure. Yeah. It took a while. So yeah, I worked at Rent the Runway for quite a while through a ton of growth, through a ton of sort of changes for the team. Like I said, maturing process, maturing tooling, um, and started noticing a pattern. I won't even say I started noticing it. It actually took a step back with some of my colleagues there to kind of have it click and realize that this was a thing. But in hindsight, looking back, there was so much thrash around process and tooling and how the team coordinated around releases.
Hmm.
We were wanting to ship product frequently. We had a pretty good release cadence. There was this rotating cast of, I feel like, EMs or maybe a PM would come in and sort of realize, oh, like this release process is a miss. There's a lot of noise. We're having kind of a lot of issues and constant hot fixes. Like, let's put some guardrails in, let's do better. And they just come up with a new checklist. And so we had these long run books, like release
Yes.
run books, right?
Yeah.
New checklist. Okay, great. Static checklist. Folks aren't following it. There's no audit trail. You don't know what's actually happened when, so you don't know that things are actually being executed in the kind of nice, perfectly designed system. A ton of just like back and forth on Slack, trying to get people on the same page. Especially at a product forward company, there's a lot of stuff launching and features, and just so much back and forth and coordination, and realizing over time how much bandwidth this was taking, especially when we had a release rotation, which is a common model. So folks will take turns running point on a release. That became this thing where I and many of our other engineers would sort of dread your week or two when you were running a release, because it was just mayhem. You couldn't get product work done. It was just not fun. And this started adding up, and realizing like, why, why does it have to be like this? Why do we keep just like refreshing a checklist and nothing really changes? There has to be, a better way to do this, to put together all these pieces
Yeah.
and run a saner process here. But again, like I said, when you're in it, you don't have that distance. We weren't sort of taking a step back and realizing like there's an opportunity here. It's just like this is the status quo. It definitely sucks. We're realizing this. You can see it because these people come in and then for a moment decide, oh, let's try something else. Doesn't go anywhere. But then the stars sort of aligned. COVID happened. Rent the Runway had some layoffs, some furloughs. We all, in different ways, had time to sort of take a break, take a step back. And this was one of, admittedly, a few ideas that we were tossing around, sort of a core group of the mobile team at the time. We were very close friends. We knew we had this idea. We wanted to start something together. We didn't know what. And as things were sort of on pause and quieting down during COVID, we started meeting more and more regularly to discuss just like ideas, like stuff that might be interesting to work on. And
Meeting
this I
in person or on Zoom?
Zoom, yeah.
Okay.
So
Okay.
yeah, we
I just
were all spread out at the time, so not in person. We started a doc, and we had a bunch of ideas in there. And very early on, one of the other co-founders put down this idea of a release management platform. And it's interesting. We still have this doc and we go back sometimes and look at it. We also sort of have this as part of a presentation. We give new hires to sort of talk a bit about the origin story and just like see so clearly that we all gravitated to that idea. There was a lot of comments there. We were talking about it a lot, right? And so very quickly realized with that distance and taking a step back, like this is a problem area that we sort of experienced at all the teams we've been a part of.
Yeah.
Different shapes and sizes, of course, but there was an opportunity here. Like why deal with the status quo? That was the other sort of key theme, is like at all these teams, there was some understanding, some recognition in the backs of people's heads, at least, that like this was a really sticky part of their overall like development process. But this inertia, or this idea that just like this is the way that you ship mobile,
Yeah.
it's hard to deal with it. So we really try to engage with that and understand, like, is there an opportunity here? Can it be sort of actually made better in a meaningful way? We had a lot of conversations with friends and connections at other companies just to validate as well our experiences at that point. And for the most part, had our ideas sort of confirmed. Definitely a range of sort of responses there. But for the most part, teams of different shapes and sizes, they sort of rated their release process as quite inefficient and full of noise, and that wasn't
Yeah.
great. And that's how the thing worked. And so it all kind of went from there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess I'd love to dig in more, just because I think the people that are, that are out there will be interested. I mean, can you take us through a little bit, like what is the typical release process, right? It's like, what are the things, because I'm sure the product, I mean, because you've been doing this for a while, so I'm sure the product has evolved and you started with an initial set of features. So just like, I'd love to dig in a bit more on like, what were the first pain points that you were trying to solve? And then I guess like, how has the product evolved over time? And, I guess, these are many questions in one, I apologize, but just kind of looking at what are the biggest problems, that you think
Yeah.
that developers are facing in this space right now?
Yeah. There's a lot to the question.
Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
We saw kind of the problem space as quite broad from the beginning, and this actually made it hard in the early days of kind of building the product, certainly, and even sort of building the company. Some parts of our initial kind of like wireframes and mockups look very similar to how they are today. We had this idea of a really comprehensive end-to-end release cycle. A lot of people think of releases and release automation and their minds immediately go to CI, just like the build process. But releases start well before that. There's a lot of Git wrangling with like branch cuts, cherry
Yeah.
picks if fixes
Sure.
come in. Just like getting on the same page about what is going to be shipping, the sort of readiness or preparedness of feature work, both across your code, but also project management, because PMs are looking over there. There was always disagreements there. So starting well before the build process, the sort of like kick off feature readiness, sort of like coordination that happens well before even your first RC, transitioning through, of course, to your first RC, and very often like multiple as you go through that kind of QA regression testing process. Maybe you need to sort of get some fixes in and spin up new builds, sort of managing that process. Any distribution pre-production, so internal distribution, alphas, betas, different kinds of ways teams are like testing internal builds is an important stage, all the way through to, depending on the team you're on, there's a sort of sign-off process potentially, depending if you're in like a sort of regulated vertical, whatever, collecting these sort of sign-offs. A lot of teams do go, no-go meetings. There's sort of a stage for that.
Yep.
And of course, eventually getting everything actually packaged up into the stores, submitted, released, and rolled out. And rollout is a whole domain unto itself. So we really saw the pain point as all these pieces put together, all these stakeholders involved weighing in at different points in time, balls getting dropped, which slows everything down, a cascade of like delays when any given part of the process isn't tight, isn't going well. So we started quite big with the vision, and that made it hard early to get started. And we went through YC, and sort of our partners there were a little bit at odds with us. Like their whole motto is like, do something small, get it shipped, get some folks using and paying for it. It was hard to fill in this big vision, and we felt there was a really high bar to delivering value, because a lot of the value is in connecting all these pieces.
Yeah, you need all the integrations and all of the pieces. Yeah, I can totally see how it would be hard to find a scoped thing. Anyway, keep going.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, so much of the ROI and the value is in the orchestration across these pieces, right? So hopefully I'm still sort of answering your question.
No, you are.
Like,
go ahead.
We started broad. We certainly picked off a few key places to start, certain automations, scheduled branch cuts, for example. It was like small stuff, labeling tickets in Jira. There's this whole process. For example, if you use a project management tool, like you want to label work so you know like when stuff shipped.
Right. Yep.
A little automation there. Of course, integrations to back it up. We needed to prioritize sort of based on what we knew was being used by the majority of our kind of ICP, our core customer. So we did pick off small pieces, but going back again, like compared to wireframes, we had since the beginning this like high level end-to-end sort of framework that we wanted to sort of deliver teams. And we just kind of started there and chipped away at it. And, you know, first few, I won't even say customers, we had like a few teams who were connected to or past teams of ours that were the first to kind of test drive the product. And it was a huge leap of faith for them. And honestly, probably more time spent than saved at that stage, because there was so little in there kind of connecting everything, and there wasn't much depth. But at the same time, they needed to get their teams bought in to try this new platform and kind of the process change and culture change that comes with that. So yeah, early days, it was broad and shallow and very hard to actually, you know, realize the value we knew we could. At that point, we had conviction we could bring to the whole end-to-end process.
Yeah. And then I guess there are particular things that I would love to ask about more, but prior to that, I guess, I mean, how have you evolved it over time, right? Like I would imagine that you've had to pick and choose in terms of filling in the different pieces of the wireframe, as you called it. And I feel like, and again, I have my own bias in this area for sure, which I can ask about, but I would imagine that when it comes to shipping, there's so many components to it, I guess is what I would say, right? I mean, obviously there's the rollout components, there's the monitoring observability components, there's the experimentation components. I can imagine there are so many areas that you could get into or that customers would be driving you towards. So again, before I start showing my bias, I'd love to just learn a little more from you around the vision. Makes total sense. I'm just curious, like, where are the customers driving you towards now the most? Like, where are the problems that like they're trying to face?
Everything all at once. We work really closely with a lot of our customers, and these are some of the, you know, biggest and best mobile teams in the world. They come to us with great ideas. We want to make sure those are heard. And we've been lucky, I would say, in that, like, so far a lot has aligned with how we originally saw things, or we understand kind of where they fit in. So a lot, people are always very impressed, like how much we've done with such a small team. Maybe to answer you more directly, I think a lot of the early focus was, well, first of all, prioritizing integrations. Like, we want to support any given kind of tool a team is using. When I say sort of shallowness or depth in the product, we weren't thinking in terms of like, we want to start vertically integrating. We want to start offering our own CI. We want to start offering our own monitoring tool, for example.
Makes sense.
It was very much allowing teams to plug and play, bring your own tools. You shouldn't be locked in. And this coordination problem has nothing to do with specific kind of pieces of that tool chain. It's about connecting them, automating things across those pieces. And so from that lens, a lot of our early prioritization was actually, maybe this is like reducing it sort of or boiling it down too much, but like prioritizing integrations, because the plug and play integration layer is super key. So we did a lot to kind of survey teams for any given integration point. And these have been expanding over time. But the early ones, like version control, project management tools, of course, the stores, but even then there's more than just Google Play and the App Store. Making sure we are prioritizing there. That's sort of a early days, a big specific ask is like, okay, Runway has this area of the platform where you can help us manage and automate stuff around sort of project management work. My team uses this tool. You don't support it right now. We want to get that in there. So that was a big part of the early prioritization, I guess. And then the other part of the sort of answer is probably more to do with like which domains, which parts of the process we focused on first. Started early with store things. One of the early sort of North Stars was we don't want you having to log into App Store Connect or Play Console all the time, or a lot of teams have folks across different apps and they're switching tabs and logging in and out of different store accounts.
You can pull that data out and show it.
Get that out, build an abstraction layer. So you're not having to deal with, honestly, what are pretty subpar platforms. So keep folks out of there as much as possible was an early kind of North Star. So a lot in the sort of App Store related integrations and a lot in the sort of Git wrangling project management area. We wanted to give teams a clearer picture of what's shipping when aligned product and engineering, because sort of the interdisciplinary aspect is a big theme for us as well. Those are maybe some of the early focuses. if that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a it's a very real problem. I'm sure that you're finding a lot of interested customers. I think, again, I'll show my bias now. I think part of it that I think is really interesting is, and we hear this also when we talk to customers, is there's obviously this intersection of you do a release, but you want to know if it's healthy, right?
Mhm.
And that is not just the release itself, but it's also experiments, features
Mhm.
within the release. So I'd love to actually learn a little more. I guess maybe I have two different questions. Again, I apologize for asking multiple questions at once.
Okay.
But when you talk about, first the integrations for the sign-offs and all of those things, one area which you might already support, I don't know, is I would imagine that there can be checklists for individual features, like
Mm,
is this feature flagged, or
mm,
do you have analytics about this or something along those lines. So I'm just curious to learn more, like, has that come up? Because to me, at least from
mm.
what I've seen, it's a very real problem that, like, stuff gets shipped and you realize after the fact, well, oops, like I don't have the right feature flag, I don't have the right analytics,
Yeah.
and then you're back doing like another cut. Um,
Yeah.
so I'm just curious, like, has that come up as something that people want help, at least like from an organizational perspective?
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting question. Certainly flavors of that. I think they're kind of different altitudes. We definitely see some teams like get pretty in the weeds with how they structure kind of checklists. And these aren't just like checklists for humans to run through. You can create these kind of gates in Runway, use our API and webhooks to interact with them programmatically. And so teams can get pretty fancy there to build just the kind
Right.
of uh, flow that they want based on outside signals. That's maybe part of what you're asking about. But yeah, more broadly, I think it's this sort of combination of these different sources of data, these different sort of states that things can be in. You talked about sort of like the feature flags. That's a whole other mess on top of just your binary
Yep.
release cycles.
Absolutely. Yeah.
The effect of the relationship that has on app health, sort of like you need to transpose a lot of information in your day to day across these tools to make sense of it. And I think that's where a lot of the friction and struggle that we saw came in. So again, a little bit more of like, can we pull together this information, make it useful in concert for folks, potentially automate some stuff based on it. We have like rollout automations that look at like signals from health and stuff, but more about combining these signals in one place and being smart
Yep.
about helping folks understand it versus they need to go out to these different places and kind of self-serve the info, mentally like map it. A key, maybe to make it concrete, like one example, again, going to feature flags, you go to a feature flagging tool, it's like a big long list, a mess of just like flags. Super hard to understand what's on, what's off, what's up with different audiences or rollouts of flags. And God forbid you want to sort of understand someone somewhere on your team has made a change and that's actually broken some checkout flow or some key path, like see key conversion in your app. It currently or has been really hard to just like figure that out. And so Runway as this hub where we are already looking at all these signals of health during a rollout. It could be folks instrumented stuff in Bitdrift. It could be other crash reporting tools, product analytics. This is a
Yep.
whole other one I want to get
Right.
into.
Yeah.
Everything you should be looking at to just understand and know the app is healthy. Pull that in. Teams configure metrics, thresholds. There are ways to sort of automate like the green red sort of model of how things are going, and then layer on top of that information from feature flagging. So Runway can integrate with flagging platforms, and we can run this sort of continuous diff on your flags. So any changes, not just on off, but if you've rolled a flag out more, changed an audience, we sort of build this diff, sort of mark that moment in time. And then there's some views in Runway where we overlay that on all of these health metrics. And so if you see key conversion or obviously crash free rate is the obvious one, but
Yep.
you talk a lot about
Yep.
how that's not enough. Any key metric you've defined, you can see sort of if there's a deviation.
Yeah.
Oh, these flags were changed, this audience changed, this rollout changed, and have a quicker sort of path to resolution. So again, I hope I've answered some of the question, but it's
No,
really
no.
about sort of like transposing a lot of information, helping teams actually make it useful versus just sitting in a dashboard that someone doesn't look at.
I mean, it makes total sense to me. I mean, because again, from our customer base, obviously, people use Bitdrift for a lot of different things, but one of the things that they are always asking about is, well, I want to compare this release to this release, and you have a lot of information that at least right now we don't have. It's like we don't know the
Mhm.
rollout percentages and all of those things, right? So like it's
Mhm.
hard for us to know for sure when a particular release got cut, like what
Mhm.
percentages it rolled out, all of those things. So I mean I think there's some interesting integration points overlaps just in general. I'm not talking about Bitdrift, but just between
Yeah.
what you're doing and then the various observability providers, because I think like health is something
Mhm.
obviously that people care about a lot. I mean, like they want to know when to pause, they want to know, when they have to completely pull it or need to do a hot fix or any of those things.
Yeah.
So it's a pain point that I think people face constantly.
Yeah. No, for
Um,
sure.
yeah. So I guess yeah, let's briefly talk about the future. We did talk about AI. I'm sure you're having your own conversations about AI or anything else.
Yeah.
I'd love to know from you, like where do you see the mobile space going? Like what are the things that you're most interested in right now?
Yeah. Yeah, we have like a couple of thoughts on this. One, which isn't trying to dodge the question, but it's sort of going another direction, is like we know AI is going to change the way that teams are writing code and building things, and also changing like the tooling around it. But at the end of the day, well, maybe not if you take it to some dystopian extreme, but like at the end of the day, these are still teams working together. There's going to be these human touch points. There's going to
Yep,
be coordination, and that's where since the beginning, like we've focused. Like, yeah, some of this is tooling, some of it's automation, and that stuff can change with AI. But ultimately, like we see ourselves as kind of a collaboration tool. And it's really about the people and helping them get on the same page, unlocking sort of better patterns of working and ways of sort of collaborating around stuff that shipping, releases, et cetera. So on the one hand, a lot of the day to day may change, but you still have folks in a room or on Zoom together, coordinating, collaborating, and this framework sort of across it all is still going to be very important. That's sort of one of the ways we look at this. The other one, which is a little bit sort of lower level, and I'm sure maybe you guys sort of think about this too. For me, it's this funny like fox and hen house situation where AI is writing more and more code. AI is going to be responsible, or is already, for more and more of the testing of that code. We see, and sort of add to that, maybe the whole like, the junior engineer problem people are talking about, that hole that's going to exist. Like we see a growing quality crisis, or at least a risk of that, right?
I agree.
Um,
Yeah,
and so we'll still need some good checks and balances in place. Maybe it's not always human in loop, but there might still be a little bit of that. But in general, just good observability, good uh good, I guess, tooling or people around what's
yeah.
happening to make sure that there's not this quality
Right.
collapse.
Yeah, I was gonna say, and one of the things that we've started to think about, and again, this is not fully formed, I don't know where it leads, is if we assume that in the future more and more code is going to be written by the agents, which is probably true to some degree, how can we help the agents write code in a way that
Mhm.
works well with the tools? Like
Mhm.
that's actually, I think, a more interesting question, right? Just
Mhm.
because if the agents can generate, they're probably gonna be bugs, right? But how do we help release management be better with the tools, or
Mhm.
how do we help have better monitoring or observability of the code that's actually getting released? So,
Yeah.
I mean, it's very refreshing for me to hear you, not just splash AI all over your website. I mean, I think we're the same in the sense that I believe this is very real technology. Like, we will certainly add AI features where it makes sense, but I don't think the AI stuff is the end all be all
Mhm.
solution to all problems, I guess.
Yeah, I think we're aligned there. There's a lot of pressure, and especially when you're at this sort of stage as a startup and a company in this kind of space, there's so much noise, and there's a lot of
Yeah.
pressure to do kind of like what you said, just tack AI
Hmm.
onto everything. Uh, Resisting that, but not also being sort of like a luddite about it. Like we know what's happening. Our own
Yep.
team is obviously engaging in this kind of stuff. So yeah, like thinking about it sort of critically, but also thoughtfully, how you want to engage and bring it all the way back. As long as humans are in the picture, that's important. And being thoughtful about how we sort of incorporate AI in the product and how we're thinking about sort of what's gonna change with AI. Humans still in the picture. Maybe even, I don't know. Think of these agents as another part of your team, right? There's
Yeah.
interface there. There's
Sure.
surface areas that need to be managed. So yeah, our heads aren't in the sand, but yeah, there's a lot a lot of noise to it, I think, as well. That's not going to be productive long term.
Cool. Fantastic. Before we end, is there any final hot takes that you'd like to leave us with, either about technology or scuba diving or anything else?
About hot takes, I'd encourage everyone to try out scuba diving if you haven't already. Highly recommend. Hot takes wise, we didn't really get here, but it's related to the human stuff. I think one thing we'd like to talk about that has surprised us along the way, we had this sense of it, but then recently ran a survey and kind of measured it, is automation paradox. Maybe this ties into AI. Like there's even before AI, there's been so much focus on like tooling from an automation perspective. That's where the pain is. If we could just automate all the sort of manual tasks, we'll be good. And we've had this inkling that yes, like that's some of the problem, but there's also a human layer. And we ran this survey of like 300 plus mobile teams recently, asking some questions around kind of process and team setup, and found that teams who self-report a higher level of automation, more sort of maturity in the automation area, they at the same time report the same sort of average wasted time per release cycle as teams that self-report much less automation.
Interesting.
Which, you know, there's various factors feeding into that, but we've been calling it this automation paradox and sort of confirming this hunch that, you know, that is one piece of a bigger problem to solve.
But then what is the solution? Or you just don't know, have to figure it out.
Solutions Runway. If I'm allowed to say that. No, I think it's like, it's nothing novel, right? I think it's just more understanding from leadership that automation, and maybe take the modern extension of that, AI is not panacea, right? And so
I see.
need to
Yeah. So like what you're saying is that it has to be automation done right, not just automation for automation's sake. Is that basically what you're saying?
It's that, and also this sense of what we see sometimes is like you throw a bunch of automation into the mix, things speed up, teams start, well, it feels like they're shipping more quickly, but you actually increase the size of the so-called black box. There's a lot of stuff happening under the hood, a lot of changes happening that's automation driven or maybe AI driven, and visibility goes down. The sort of transparency, understanding across a team goes down. And so you have this sort of like response on the human side of more back and forth on Slack, more engineering product trying to get on the same page because stuff is happening that no one knows like what's going on. So it's sort of this reverse effect, right? Where things are speeding up, but also getting harder as they do. The solution being thoughtful automation, the right sort of process and culture around it, and the right tooling to make stuff to fight the black box effect, make sure stuff is clear, communication model is sort of well set up for that, all that kind of thing.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining. This was a fantastic chat. Also really enjoyed it. So that's a wrap for this episode of Beyond the Noise, Signals, Stories, and Spicy Takes. Huge thanks to Gabriel for joining and sharing his story. You can find this episode and all past ones on the Bitdrift YouTube channel. And if you had fun, drop us a review, tell your friends, or yell your favorite hot take into the void. And just make sure to tag us. I'm Matt Klein, and I'll see you next time.